Hey everybody, this is Joel from Anigame, and we're here at PAX 2018, and today we're speaking to Matt Firor. Matt, what's your official title at Bethesda?
I'm the game director on Elder Scrolls Online.
Perfect. I was at the panel yesterday, and I heard it was your first time in Australia. How are you liking it so far, and do you have any plans to do anything specific out here in Australia while you're here?
So I've actually been here for almost over a week. I was at Armageddon in New Zealand and did some stuff there. Then I went to Sydney because Bethesda has an office in Sydney, and now I'm in Melbourne, so I'm doing like the mini tour. I've had a little time to get out and about, but not as much as I should. Think I need to come back for months in order to cover everything.
You mentioned you like your farmland, and we've got plenty of that out here as well. So you'll be right at home. But you also mentioned yesterday in the panel that you've worked in games so long, and you know nothing but games. And a lot of you guys at Bethesda, the culture there is everyone kind of stays around, and you know nothing but games. Do you have hobbies outside of games? And if you could have a dream job elsewhere, what would Matt Firor be doing if it wasn't for games?
Well, I mean, I know things other than games, but I've never really. For about 8 years in the early part of my career, I had a day job, where I was a software engineer, But yeah, I've been doing games for a long, long time. But I never really thought about it as work. That's the thing. It's like when you do something that you really love, it's hard to think of it as work. So, but I have tons of hobbies. I play guitar. I read a ton of books. Like I said at the panel yesterday, I live on a horse farm that my wife runs, and so I do a fair amount of mowing and stuff on the tractor and stuff like that, which keeps me grounded, which is great.
Lots of farm work. So you also mentioned, or I'm not sure if it was you specifically, but at the panel that a lot of people miss game manuals in games these days, and not specifically manuals, but what about games of the past do you miss that aren't in present games, whether it be the way they're played or features of the games or even something like a manual?
Yeah, in the early days of games, there were no rules, so it was, there weren't really genres like there are now. The first Fallout game was a turn-based RPG. It's like, where does that happen? And obviously it was done a lot back then, and it doesn't happen anymore. And I think now it's, people expect you to make games of a certain type based on the games that you've done before, and it might pigeonhole you a little bit. But in the old days, the sky was the limit. Any idea you had, because the stakes weren't quite so high. It didn't cost that much money to make a game, and you had a chance to experiment a little more. And I miss a little bit about those days, but. One of the good things about working for a company like Bethesda is they're willing to take risks because the industry can get a little stale every once in a while, and it's good to shake things up. Definitely. So like Elder Scrolls Online kind of defies categorization because it's not really a hardcore MMO, and it's more like an online role-playing game with friends with some MMO elements, and they gave me the freedom to do that, which is great.
So. You mentioned that the Elder Scrolls Online, it updates every 12 weeks. So what's it like dealing with player feedback, and I assume that kind of shapes the way things go forward, because if it's a live game, so it's always ever changing. How hard is it to keep up with like gaming trends and things like that to make sure that your stuff is still relevant at all times? Like, I know you're probably not going to throw in a battle royale mode just because that's the in thing at the moment, but like, how else do you keep on top of trends and make sure that your game doesn't feel like it was meant to be made 11 years ago, but it's still current and continues to be current?
Yeah, we have a couple of different ways we evaluate feedback. So first, there are 3 different categories of things we look at. One is literally direct player feedback, and one is our ideas for what the game should be, on the development team, and the third is actual data based on what the players are doing when they're in the game. Mm-hmm. And if you put the 3 of those together, you get a pretty good idea of not only what players are doing, but what their feedback actually means, because sometimes their feedback doesn't actually point to the problem that you need to fix. So by triangulating those 3 things, we have a pretty good idea of what needs to be done. But right now we got a good thing going. We have updates, average every 12 weeks. We have 4 updates a year, and players love new content. So we put out lots of new content all the time.
Speaking of your new content, your first big expansion after Elder Scrolls Online first kind of rebranded was the Morrowind expansion, and then not long ago you released Somerset. Yep. So what kind of, I'm sure you're planning years out, what kind of thought process goes into what the players will go to next?
Well, we have ideas for what we want to do, you know, because there are a lot of good stories to tell in Tamriel. So yeah, we're already playing next year's stuff because, of course, this has a long tail to create that, and we know what we're doing the year after that, and we have plans for the year after that. So yeah, we have plans for a long time. But I think we look at the map of Tamriel, and then we look at kind of things that we'd like to do that we haven't been able to do yet. Like for Somerset, we really never did any High Elf content before. You know, there was the Aldmeri Dominion in the game is based around the High Elves, but none of the zones, well, one of the zones was based in a High Elf territory, but it didn't really do a full exploration, and we wanted to go deep on that, so it gave us a chance to do that.
Yep. So yeah, as you mentioned, that was a real kind of high fantasy setting, the elves and everything like that. Does that also factor into what you guys want to make? Is it the dev team going, we'd love to do something in XYZ, or we want to do a snow region or something like that, so let's go to one of the other fan favorite places, or things like that? Is it primarily they're the people that are working there 9 to 5 or longer on these games? That's obviously got to come into it as well as what fans want as well.
Yeah, it's all the above. You know, I mean, at this point, the players want us to go to everywhere. So you just name anywhere and it'll be fine. Any region, any province. But you know, but like for the DLC that just launched a couple days ago, and in a week or two on console, Murkmire, you know, people had been asking us. A very small subset of the player base loves Argonians.
Yes.
And so, and they're very vocal about it, and they only play Argonians. And so that's what we did Murkmire, which is an Argonian-based DLC. And it gave us the chance to kind of explore that Argonian thing that hasn't really been explored in an Elder Scrolls game before. And that's a good example of players kind of asking us about it. And we're like, yeah, that's a good idea. We should go do that. And then digging through the lore and coming up with a great story.
Yep. Actually, you just mentioned the lore, and there are gaps in the Elder Scrolls lore. It's a very long-running thing. So I know with the Somerset add-on, you kind of plopped in and you kind of established some of your own canon lore there because it hadn't been fleshed out. Yep. So what kind of stresses come with making, like for your writers and things like that, especially before you go in and tackle a brand new area or things like that? Because as you probably know, with the Fallout 76 and the Brotherhood of Steel, like fans will go through the lore with a fine-tooth comb, and that's not right. And what kind of like stresses, and how do you overcome that?
I'm somewhat familiar with that phenomenon.
Yeah.
So the lore is the lore, and it is held by Bethesda Game Studios. But we have a lore master, Lawrence Schick, on staff, whose job it is to maintain continuity in the lore. So there are no ideas and no explorations in Elder Scrolls Online that don't go through the lore master and through Bethesda Game Studios. And we have to do that to maintain continuity because it's a really long timeline, and there's a ton of different players, and you know, Daedra and Aedra and provinces and races and extinct races, and yeah, it's really complicated. So everything that we do is done with them so that they can make sure that the continuity stays intact.
Perfect. So the game's in good hands.
Yes, it is.
It was kind of touched on yesterday at the panel as well that games are kind of made in a vacuum a little bit. So they're in development for a long time. Pete mentioned that a lot of the time you don't want to go play other games and things like that. I know you probably should, or like it helps see what trends are current and things like that. But also chasing current trends. If your product is fair or far out, you kind of got to weigh that stuff up as well. So I'm sure that Elder Scrolls Online, you mentioned it was in development for about 7-8 years. I'm guessing the product that launched even 3-4 years ago went through a number of iterations as well.
Yeah.
So what kind of, like, how hard is it to do that? Because I'm sure your very first idea for Elder Scrolls is well and truly far beyond what it is now.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Because, you know, when we first started the idea for what ESO would be, it was 2007, 2008, and it was a much different world back then. And now, you know, in between 2007 and then when we launched in 2014, Skyrim launched. Like when we were setting up the project, it was Oblivion was the Elder Scrolls standard, and Morrowind it was only 5 years before that, right? It was a long time ago, and so. But in between, Grand Theft Auto launched, like a bunch of big franchises kind of changed the way that online people think about online. Star Wars: The Old Republic launched, and so we had to make a bunch of changes even before launch. And of course, after we launched, we've made no secret about it. Like we've gone in and made really substantial changes to the way the leveling system works, and making it less of a 2002 rule set EverQuest style MMO, which is really rigid and really grindy, and just kind of lessening the grind and all that, and letting people play together and be social and drop levels and just really create a character and play. And that's what Elder Scrolls is all about. And the game has been moving that way ever since it launched.
And since the rebrand, or even before that, it's been, I assume, considered quite a success within Bethesda Game Studios?
Oh, yeah. It's been, it's been great since we came out on console, especially because the PC launch was pretty big, but console, I think a huge percentage of Elder Scrolls players are on console, and so Skyrim especially. And so when we launched on console with a lot of the changes that I just talked about, that's when it became a huge hit.
I'm not sure if you have mentioned it in the past at all. I know games like Destiny, I think the Division kind of do it as well. They've come out and said they have a 10-year plan or anything included, like in mind for their game. Is there anything like that for Elder Scrolls? Like, how long are you going to want to keep updating this? Is it going to be similar to World of Warcraft, or it kind of similar evolves over the thing and it never becomes a Elder Scrolls Online 2? Or
Yeah, I'd hate to say there's a 10-year plan because I have no idea what's happening in 10 years in the industry outside of ESO, but we are more like what World of Warcraft is doing, where we have an idea for the next couple of years, and then we'll make changes based on what we see fans wanting or what other games are doing, or kind of new and interesting concepts that come in, or new platforms like console. We weren't planning on even going to console when we first started the game. So external influences definitely are a factor. So right now, like I said, we're actively playing next year. We're doing design work for the year after that. We're pretty sure what we're doing the year after that, but then every year we'll keep reevaluating out and see what's happening.
Yep. And will there ever be a stage, it might be hard for you to answer, but where you feel like Elder Scrolls Online is safe, it's kind of ticking over, and you might want to branch out? Being of the online studios, you're the director there. Bethesda have quite a large catalogue of IP. Have you, hypothetically, if you could work on another Bethesda-owned IP and do something similar, whether it be like a hardcore MMO or just something with an online kind of interactivity, obviously not Fallout 76, but what would you kind of gravitate towards if you could pick another one of their Bethesda IP?
Yeah, there's no way I could answer that question without rampant speculation and.
Yeah, that's hypothetically.
Yeah, so there are no hypotheticals on the internet.
Don't touch it. Yeah.
I am going to leave that one right there.
No worries, I understand that. All right, final question, wrapping up here. Bethesda over the last few years have been quite respected in the gaming industry and appreciated by a lot of the gamers for how they do their game reveals and things like that, especially at E3. And it's either it's available now or it's available very soon, and even some of the what's the right word here? The spectacle around the reveal is pretty much an event. What's your favorite, in the time that you've been at Bethesda, what's your favorite game reveal that Bethesda have announced, whether it be your own game or any of the games? What was one that kind of sticks in your head?
Certainly Fallout Shelter, because it was, we knew it was happening, but the world didn't, and so just to go up on stage and say, hey, we've been doing this thing and you can play it right now, and everyone in the audience is pulling out their phones, and that was really cool.
Yeah. So I've recently watched I think it was Danny O'Dwyer's documentary about that, where it was even a big collaboration with Apple just to get that to go down and not let anyone leak it. And it was a very special moment. I was in the Bethesda crew in Sydney. I had a really big event there, and they had this. We were in a theatre and they live streamed it, and even at the time I was like, because it was straight after Todd announced that Fallout 4 is happening and you can get the Pip-Boy, and I'm like, I need to go online and try and pre-order that, and then I was like, oh my god, there's more. Yeah, people weren't expecting 2 Fallout games there at all. So before we go, is there anything you want to talk to people about Elder Scrolls Online or pitch there? Or maybe one other question, how accessible, if someone hasn't jumped onto Elder Scrolls Online yet, how open to new players is it right now?
Yeah, it's the best time to start ESO because the chapters that we do, you call them expansions, we call them chapters. And the reason for that is it's not just marketing speak. I actually demand that they call them chapters because since ESO doesn't have levels, really, when you say expansion and you think EverQuest, World of Warcraft, Dark Age of Camelot, you think end game, super grindy, I have to get a player, I got to get a character up to level 100 just to get there. But our chapters are actually designed for new players just as much as they are for veterans. So a new player can get Somerset, go right through a tutorial everyone get right into Somerset right from the get-go. And that is the magic of ESO, is you can, the new stuff is just as accessible to new players as all of the older game.
So everyone feels included. And
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, I think we'll wrap that up. This has been Joel from Anygame, and stay tuned for more coverage from PAX 2018.